Hi everybody, welcome to our special Q&A webinar. This is a webinar where we answer the many questions from your session last week on January 29th. I'm joined by Giselle McLaughlin, Stephen Bowman and Julie Garland McClellan. We are going to have a free-form discussion on the many questions raised during our webinar last week. So I'm going to hand over to Giselle to get us started.
Kia ora. Greetings to everybody. Thanks, Sean, very much for the opportunity for us three to be back together again, only within 2 weeks of the webinar. So yeah, just as Sean's explained, we had a highly subscribed, well-attended webinar, which meant we didn't have time to take questions. So as a panel, we thought the best thing we could do to serve those who were there was to look at some of the questions afterwards and come back to you and answer them. So that's what we're going to do today, and we hope that you find the answers useful. Just we have a little bit of time, so we will go into a bit more detail than we could have during the webinar. So the first question, I'm going to just let you read that on the screen, is the company purpose that we were talking about during the webinar, or the purpose of the directors on the board. So absolutely, this is the company purpose. So this is the organisational's purpose, which should be set by the board, of course, in conjunction with management and operations. So yeah, that was the immediate answer, not that why are the directors there, for example, as this question goes on to say, to deliver value to the shareholders according to their personal intent.
That's
Julie,
actually it's a good question, Giselle, because they've asked if what's the purpose of the directors on the board. What some boards do, which I find really interesting, and they do a good job of it, is each year they ask each of their directors, what's your purpose for being on this board? What do you personally want to get out of your next year's service on this board? And it's a really cool way to start the year off, because sometimes a director will say, well, look, I'd like to get to know such and such as type of stakeholder, or another director might say, I'd really like to be more involved in the policy side of things, or whatever it might be. There's no wrong answer there, but what's your purpose of being on this board for the next 12 months? What would you personally like to get out of it? Could be a very good start-off conversation with each of your directors.
And that's nice. And that's a third angle. And Julie, I'll come to you in a second. But just to confirm, that we were being asked here is, are you serving the interests of the shareholders, or are you serving the interests of the community through that stakeholder lens? Julie.
Yeah, I love the saying that the board are the custodians of the purpose of the organisation. You're there to make sure it does what it was created to do. And that might drift a little over time, but it shouldn't be changing rapidly. And I love Steve's idea of asking directors, what's your purpose? What do you want to get out? But equally, the second question is, what's your purpose? What do you want to put in? How does your service on this board help us to achieve what this company needs to achieve if it's successful in its purpose? How aligned are we? And I often work with faith-based organizations, and I quite like it when they pray for guidance at the beginning of meetings, because it's a great way of reminding people of the purpose and why we're here and what we're trying to achieve. Or you can simply put your purpose or your vision on the front of your board pack or on the top of every page. There are many things you can do, but if your board have lost sight of the purpose, you're on hiding to nothing.
Yeah, nice. I just want to say, I think this reminds us about always being clear in our language when we talk about the purpose, organisational, the intent, director, the desire to learn, as Stephen reminded us, a director, and then the shareholders, what is their desired outcome through the organisational purpose, not instead of it. All right, Sean, thanks team, let's go on.
Can we just remember as well that our duty is to the company as a separate legal entity, not to the shareholders. And
Yes.
that's really helpful when your shareholders, one of them wants to sell out, for example, and the other three want to stay in. So keeping that company view and company purpose really clarifies.
Nice. All right. Our second question. Is there a view about how many subcommittees you have and what they are? So the last phrase, on a board, that means just relating to a board. I'm going to put that to one side. So I'll start with the big picture, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleagues to express a view, because they will certainly have one. So first of all, you don't need to have committees on your board unless your rules say that you must. So some constitutions, trust deeds, or member rules, whatever you've got as your foundation document, may say you must have a committee. On that basis, you must. Otherwise, you don't have to. And I'm quite a fan of not having committees unless you really need them to cover the workload or to do some deep diving. Stephen, Julie, what have you got? How many committees?
Let me relate to you a little story that happened literally half an hour ago with a membership-based organisation. They don't have any committees at all, and they tried setting up task forces and no one was interested, and then they had to disband them because no one was getting any work done. Nothing was happening. And I said to them, look, it probably would really help you to have a finance audit risk committee in there. And it doesn't need to be made up of directors who have already shown their disinterest in this type of thing. So what if you then had there maybe someone from your accounting firm who would come along and they could do it for nothing for you because they're getting the exposure. They could even possibly be the chair of that committee. And you can maybe have one director who'd like to upskill them. So the point of that little story is that there's not one way of doing it, nor do, as many boards think, the committees have to be made up of a preponderance of directors. That also is not necessarily true unless, as Giselle said, your constitution says that it must be. So the key thing for me is that I have no difficulty with the board having no committees as long as the work is getting done and it's not inadvertently all being placed on the CEO
or the chair.
Or the chair, in fact. And then the other component is the work that needs to be getting done actually getting done with the level of rigour and expert oversight that you would expect from a good committee? So, Julie.
Yeah, I think in heated agreement, have as many subcommittees as you need, but no more, and have as many subcommittees as you are obliged to have. So, for example, if you're listed, you might find the listing rules say that you must have an audit committee. Yes. And again, with the composition of your committees, what makes sense to you? What's going to allow those committees to work? Now, if you're a big listed company in Australia, the stock exchange is going to say that your audit committee must be made up of a maximum of independent directors. But most of us, let's be honest, most of us are not on big top 200 listed boards in Australia. So it's a question of knowing what your legal requirements are, knowing what your strategy is, knowing what the skills of your board are, and then making the best decisions you can in order to use the skills to address the challenges and deliver the purpose.
Yeah, nice.
Giselle, I might just...
Yep, you go ahead, Stephen.
I might just say that if I had to do a sort of a shopping list of committees, the first one always I'd look at is a finance audit and risk committee, because that's the one that can get either out of control because no one's doing the work, or it's all left up to the staff and you're assuming they're doing a good job, but you don't really know. So if you have no committees, that finance audit risk committee or function is just so important. I think it shouldn't just be left up to the board or to the staff. There needs to be some lightning rod in there that will give us insights of potential emerging issues without just relying on the staff to alert us to that. The second one, if I was to have one, potentially would be around the people, nominations, remuneration side of things, sometimes called a governance committee. But again, that's as you get a little bit more sophisticated and you need a place or a home for things like policy reviews and governance reviews and CEO and board performance planning, all those sorts of things, succession planning. And then after that, then it becomes what's appropriate. I'm seeing more boards start to set up strategic stakeholder engagement committees of the board, but they've got their 10, 15, 20-year time frame, not, what are we going to engage with this year? The one committee I've found time and time again that has been less than useful, and I've disbanded more of those than I've had breakfasts, I think, is sometimes called a strategic committee or a strategy committee. And the difficulty with that is strategy is something the whole board should be looking at, should be developing in conjunction with the staff. And the difficulty with that sort of committee is that they tend to make their own work because they're not quite sure what it is they're going to be doing. So, Julie.
Nice. Julie, have you got one? Sorry, Sean, we're not going to move on yet. Have you got one committee you love that you think they just do such a great job?
I love the committees that really, when you have them on the agenda, the board goes, oh, right. And they all sit up and the eyes all swivel to the chair of that committee. That tells you that committee is needed by this board, that everyone, even if they don't have the time or the skill to be on the committee, everyone's excited about what the committee does. Those are the committees I love. The other thing is, if you've got a bunch of, somebody from Corn Ferry once called them hobby horse riding directors, and they're really excited about something, give them a committee and let them excite each other, and get them off your agenda and out of your other discussions. I was on a board when I was a young director, and we had a corporate governance excellence committee. And basically there were three of us and we loved corporate governance. So we read all the technical journals and we shared them with each other and we talked about them. And we just told the board if there was something coming in our regulatory environment, we'd say, yep, there's something coming. This is it. This is what we've got to do. And if there wasn't, we'd say, you've got access to the minutes.
Nothing here.
There's no need for a verbal report unless you've got a question based on what was in the minutes. And
Nice.
most people didn't have, but the three of us were perfectly happy. So again, use the passion that you've got in your boardroom. Don't waste
Nice.
it.
So I want to finish up on this with two other thoughts. One is a really nice definition of when to have committee work and when to keep work at the board. Comes from the Diversity of Thought scorecard from Lloyd Mander. And he talks about complex work needing diverse views. That's board work. Complicated work needing deep, narrow expertise. That's committee work. And I think that's a really, really interesting way of modelling it. And just a small plea is please don't put management on your committees. They stay on the other side. So as Stephen reminded us, you can bring in external advisors if your rules say, but management report to committees, they don't sit on them. All right, let's move on. So a related question, our executive director has a lot of power on the committees. What is their role? And I've just spoken to it. So your executive director, somebody who's on the board, but also working in the business, in the organisation, they should be, if they're on a committee, they are a committee member. They are not reporting in. Someone else should be doing that, or vice versa. They don't sit on the committee. They do the management side and they do report in. Anybody got an alternative or a clearer view?
Not so much an alternative, but an added nuance. A lot of EDs will attend committees by standing invitation because they need to know what's going on, what the staff workloads are. That's fantastic, unless you're talking about the Rem and Nom committee. You want to have that committee meeting without the ED, probably most of the time. And any excuses such as, but without me, nobody would take decent minutes, need to be knocked on the head. There are plenty of ways of getting decent minutes. You could even write them yourself. So make sure that you think about, what is this committee for? Who are the executives that make sense? And do we want them reporting to the committee? Do we want them just aware of what the committee is doing? And how do we handle the inevitable conflict of interest when the committee is looking at something that impacts management?
Which we're going to come to with our next question. Stephen, anything to add?
This is a bit of a rabbit hole, but it happens all the time. I noticed that the person who wrote this question mentioned executive director. Now, what that means is that they are an executive who's also a director, not just it's a fancy name. So managing director means someone who manages, who's also a director. Executive director means someone who's an executive, who's also a voting director as well. So if that's the case, and it's not unusual in some sectors, but very unusual in many others, then the conversation should be, am I acting here as an executive or am I acting here as a director? And the key thing is that I would recommend everyone look at the nomenclature they use for their chief executive position. If they're a voting member of the board, for whatever reason that might be, then absolutely executive director, managing director. If they're not a voting member, don't call them that, right?
Exactly.
Give them the name that actually reflects their position, which would be chief executive, executive officer, chief executive officer, whatever it might be.
General manager, operations manager, whatever. And nomenclature, let's just call it a label.
Yeah.
Board pros tone.
I have talked about labels until I'm bluer than the text on this slide in the face. We have so many inaccurate labels simply because they are cheaper to give people than pay rises. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, call it a duck. Don't give it a fancy title because that's cheaper than buying a swan.
Funny. All right, let's carry on. So a related question. I'd love to hear more guidance around board only time. And it's a really good pickup. And I do want to just remind everybody that a Board Pro webinar, which is only 45 minutes, cannot cover all of the knowledge you need to be a chair. And this is something that we all really care about. So I'm really happy to have the chance to talk about this. So board only time is something that ought to happen as regular practice. I'd often say every meeting, but just given that the person is saying they have quite an unusual board set up with most of the meeting, just the CEO and treasurer, and then the final quarter is just directors, secretary, and the chair. So that's not really board only time because you've still got the secretary in the room. All right, so board only time, regular, brief, and confidential until it's agreed that it's not. So the chair is responsible for setting that tone, for leading board only time, and for making sure that management are not left outside the room waiting too long if it's before the meeting, or that people don't leave and miss the board only time if your board only time is at the end of the meeting. There is a lot to say about this, and I'm going to ask Julie first to talk about how do we record board only time in the minutes, or don't we?
Yeah, minuting board only time is one of those vexed issues because the person who takes the minutes might not be there. And the only time I would have them there is if you've got one of the outsourced professional company secretaries who reports to the board and is not part of the executive. In that case, they can be there. But most, and particularly not-for-profits of the smaller variety, most often the company secretary is a split role with one of the other executive positions. That person can't be in the room because they can't really split themselves. They can split the hours, not their personal recollection of what happened. Two good ways of making notes is to have somebody take notes in the meeting, and for the chair then from those to summarize a few dot points, and at the beginning of the next board meeting, after you've done your formalities, to have a little statement that you read into the minutes of the meeting, like prior to the commencement of this meeting or at the end of the previous meeting, the board held a director only time and the following items were discussed and or decided. And then he goes boom, 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 boom through his little list of dot points. If it's a big list, oh, you've got issues. The other way to do it is for a formal note to be taken. I'm a great believer in calling the board only time notes rather than minutes. But if you are thinking you need them legally for something, make them formal, proper minutes. But for those to be taken in the meeting, then they need to be separately held. Now, most good board portals will cope with a set of minutes that can be uploaded, and they only go to the non-executive directors. They don't go to any of the executives, and they are there and stored and easy to manage. If you don't have one of those, it's a little bit more difficult to handle. But again, you can have, if you haven't got a portal, you can have an email list that's just the non-execs, as well as your normal standard board list. I really like board only time. I think it should be a routine thing. I've seen a company get into terrible trouble. They instituted board only time right towards the end of the CEO's contract, and the CEO had hysterics, and suddenly there were legal letters flying around everywhere. And the board had actually wanted to discuss that they'd heard that the CEO wanted to retire, and they were trying to discuss what present they gave her that she might like. But she got so upset about the conversation happening without her that it all came to grief.
Yes,
So
I'm going to just pause you there. So I think this is a really good reminder that of what I said in the beginning, regular, brief, reliable is the only way to go. You can't have board only time only when there's something specific to talk about. I will just add to what Julie has said, then I'm going to come to Stephen. I think when I'm chairing, often our board only time is just recorded that it happened and the directors discussed administrative topics and not much else. It doesn't have to be actually minuted unless you've got something significant to talk about. Stephen.
Yeah, I've seen board only time really misused because the staff knew there was going to be a problem because that's the only time they had their board only time. They never got to hear what happened afterwards. So it was all this secret squirrel business, and the culture of the organisation, which was tentative anyway, was starting to go downhill quickly. I've seen that time and time again. The key thing with board only time is that if a decision is made at that board only time, it has to be minuted somewhere. And you need to discuss with the chief executive what the intent or the outcome was. Now, you may decide to defer it, but don't leave your staff in the black on this one. You just need to understand that it is a tool that we can use to, as a board, discuss the things that staff shouldn't be involved in, because we don't want to change perceptions. We don't want to have their involvement in something like this or put them under pressure on something where they shouldn't be. This is stuff that is very clearly board only time. So keep it simple, make sure that any decisions are minuted, and then have a discussion with the CEO afterwards. Right? Don't just let them hang out to dry.
Yeah, and a really nice reminder. So a board I was on, we had the board only time. Then the CEO always came in on their own for that debrief, and the chair would, in front of the board, say one of two things. We've had an in-depth discussion and I'm going to catch you up on it later. Or we've had a quick discussion on some admin, and here's what the outcomes were. So sometimes the chief executive needs to hear about board only time privately, one-on-one. Sometimes they need to hear about it in front of everyone else so that there is seen to be that information sharing. So I really want to emphasize here, board only time needs to be handled sensitively and respectfully. And a good chair will do this very well and make it look easy. And someone who's struggling in their chairing can make a complete hash of all of this. So well, on that note, I would like Sean to take us on to the next question, please. Interesting question. So the person's pointing out they are an executive chair. What if you're a non-executive? So I just use the words independent chair or executive chair. Now, in New Zealand, where I'm based, executive chairs are unusual, would normally only happen in where you've got a majority shareholder who maybe in a family-owned business, the person's sort of staying on as that executive chair. It's highly unusual. And yes, in many ways, the guidance is subtly different because how you chair is someone who knows the business intimately and perhaps still is very strongly on the management side. That is going to be different. But what I would encourage you to do if you're executive chair is when you chair, seek towards independent thinking. So push yourself. Don't stay in the I know everything hat and actually try and be the chair as Switzerland, to be more neutral. A brief comment from either Julie or Stephen.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, thinking about being independent. And there was a lovely comment you made in the webinar itself, which was, as the chair, you shouldn't be talking all the time. You should be getting the others to talk. When you are chairing, you are not contributing, you are assisting other people in contributing. So the fact that you're an executive chair and you've got all of that day-to-day knowledge at your fingertips shouldn't change that. And the other thing to remember is if you have stepped into a CEO role temporarily, either during a succession or a CEO illness, you might revert to being a non-executive as soon as the need has passed, but you don't revert to being an independent for many, many months after that, simply because you don't forget what you instinctively know. So just remember those distinctions of independence, non-executive and executive, and make sure that you're aware of some of the pitfalls you could otherwise fall into.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah. Family-owned businesses are rife with all sorts of different examples. I was asked to guide a family-owned business just recently. 3 sisters, their husbands, they thought the husbands weren't directors, where in fact they were. So we had that discussion. But also their chief executive was a contracted position out to another company, and that person took on the role of executive chair because none of the directors had any experience, and he misused it terribly. He really, and they had no idea. So what we did there is we actually went out, advertised, and hired an independent chair who had skills in chairing, and the family members who are the directors are now seeing how much they'd missed out on for many years by being, to some extent, quite manipulated by the executive chair, who I think thought he was doing a good job with it, but was also so conflicted that he couldn't see what was going on there. So also, consider actually getting someone to chair who's got experience in chairing and look at it potentially as an independent position.
Yeah, I agree. I think let's for this webinar, we know that good enough governance across board pros clients comes in all shapes and sizes, and there may be very good reasons why someone's an executive chair, but be mindful. And one of the things we talked about in the webinar was how you show up. How do you show up as your best self? And being Switzerland on the outcome while having a view on decisions is really important. All right, so Sean, we've got our final question. I think this is a really good one to finish on. How do you reconcile the need for agility and flexibility with adherence to the strategy or our strategy? It's a really good question. So I think this is relevant because so much about good governance is evolving and evolving rapidly, the how we do things. And any board has the need to be flexible in the way that they work. As always, when you look at a board meeting, are we making decisions in line with the strategy? And is it still the right strategy? You've got to be constantly questioning that. Do either of you have a supplemental?
Julie, you go first.
Okay, why not? One of the things I look at is, do I need to change how I'm implementing, or do I actually need to change what I'm implementing? And so the desire to change the strategy, I always look and say, well, were any of the assumptions wrong? Have any of the trends turned around or not eventuated or completely and utterly changed? Is there some major underpinning foundation to the strategy that is no longer valid and reliable? And if there is, then I need to change my strategy. And that means I need to go through all that careful thinking again. If the underpinnings of the strategy are still sound, but the implementation isn't delivering the results, then it's a question of, okay, something's going wrong. And it's going wrong actually in the operational area, which is for the executives, because that's where implementation should happen. But the strategy itself is still sound. It's the way we're implementing it. And this is where a good board, rather than being distracted by the CEO who goes, oh, look, a nice, bright, shiny object. Oh, look, here's another one. And just in case we've got a third one here. It's that question of saying, look, this is the strategy. What actually is going wrong? And supporting them and helping them to improve their implementation. Or if they resist that, getting rid of them and replacing them with someone who will implement. You're the board, you're in charge.
That's probably not quite the flexibility they had in mind, to be fair, when they asked the question. But
yeah,
it may be we need to slow down or speed up and just be more flexible as a board. Stephen?
Slow down, speed up, apply more resources, give some extra training, whatever it takes. But if you are being resisted and you are the custodians of the future, you're making the choices that are going to deliver the future. If people are in your way, get on your steamroller.
Yeah, good for you. Stephen?
Yeah, look, I think people make strategy way too complex in many instances. And this is a really good question, because agility and flexible and adherence to strategy should be working in together with each other. So to my view, a strategy, a good strategic plan, for example, is what are the top 2, maybe 3 key things we've got to get right in the next few years, so that no matter what the future throws at us, we're going to be in good shape. And then looking at what those top 2 or 3 things are, how do we know that it is making a difference in what we're doing in those areas? Now, is this working? Now, how do we know if it's working? Well, we need to identify what are the leading indicators that indicate whether or not this is working. So if it's not working, then we need to change it. And so the agility, flexibility, and adherence to strategy should all be in the one sentence like we have here. But the adherence to strategy is only if it's working. So we need to know, how do we know if it's working? What are the outcomes that we're after? What are the metrics that we're putting in place? And if it's not working, let's change them. And so the agility and flexibility should always go alongside with strategy, because strategy is these top 2 or 3 key things that we need to get right in the next few years. How do we get there? They will change constantly. So back to you, Giselle.
Thank you, Stephen. And look, I think this is a great reminder that the webinar that we ran together was about how to be a great chair. and agility and flexibility are real requirements of being a great chair, but it touches all parts of the job. Sean, thanks for the chance for us to have a think about those questions, and back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Giselle. And everybody, Giselle, Stephen, and Julie kindly volunteer their time for these Q&A sessions. So I really appreciate that, team. It was great listening
You're
to you
welcome.
all today. So very much appreciated. Thank you. See you all again in our next webinar, everybody. Have a
You
great
will.
day.
Kia
Hi,
ora.
everyone.
Bye.